Final Exam, an Avatar The Last Airbender fanfiction. Chapter 16.
The blue-clad boy was backtracking, despite his sister's protests. If he came much closer, he discovered the creek bed and her hastily covered cooking fire, but Shiori could do nothing. She remained frozen in her tree branch perch. She dared not even move her eyes to the right from whence the red-fletched arrow had originated. Her cheek throbbed in agony from where the bowstring had whipped it. Tears still flowed freely from her affected eye. The Yuyan did not miss. The shot had been a warning. She comforted herself with this thought, even as her heart thumped loudly in her ears. A loud snap jangled against her already raw nerves. The water tribe boy struggled through a dense patch of shrubbery, moving into full view, meaning that he could easily spot her if he chose to look up. She kept her eyes fixated on a point above his head, hoping against hope that, like most people, his gaze naturally oriented downward.
Sokka, just come on!
The boy grumbled. He had his club and a weird elbow-shaped weapon drawn. Prince Zuko had warned her about it. Currently weaponless, Shiori kept completely motionless and continued to monitor him without staring directly at him. Judging from the way the Water Tribe team had been moving through the forest, she could probably outrun them if worst came to worst. If she put a little distance between them, she could restring her bow. But would they give chase if she was spotted, or would they just run away and take the Avatar with them? And would the unseen Yuyan even allow her to run? Shiori didn't know. Sweat that had nothing to do with the humidity trickled down her face. The boy scanned the area slowly. Shiori held her breath. Between her red headband and an unpainted face, it would be a miracle if he failed to spot her. A chittering blue-striped chipmunk scurried across the ground, causing the boy to start. Muttering to himself about how he never asked for hot forests or weird creature quests, he sheathed his weapons and began to make his way after his sister. Shiori breathed freely once again. She very, very slowly relaxed from her frozen position. Once the boy and girl were out of view, she turned her head by fractions to scrutinize the area where she suspected the arrow had been shot from. Nothing. Either the other archer had already moved on, or he or she was employing their greater experience to hide. Shiori saw no reason for the latter. She was obviously outclassed and currently disarmed. If her unseen brethren had been deployed to hunt the Avatar, then that was where his focus would remain. Still, she remained relatively motionless a few moments longer before pulling out the offensive arrow. It had a razor-sharp V-head on it, designed specifically for severing rope. It looked undamaged, so Shiori stored it in with her own quiver. The end fletching standing out against the sea of white, her bow warranted a closer inspection. Having the tension suddenly released like that, especially since I had been bearing the extra load of being drawn, could have potentially cracked the composite device. Thankfully, it was undamaged. Shiori took a deep breath and let it out slowly. As a survivor of over 3 full years of training on Symmetra, she was no stranger to having arrows fired at her. But always before, she had known that the archer intended to miss. This time, she was not so sure. She took a small comfort in the fact that her fellow hunter had chosen an arrow specifically designed to sever rope, instead of a traditional arrowhead. She translated that to mean that she had never been a target. The warning, however, was clear. Unfortunately, her mission was also clear and unchanged. Zuko had given specific parameters to his definition of success, one being that Admiral Zhao did not capture the Avatar. Now that she knew that there were Yuyan in the same vicinity as the Airbender, Shiori could not remain motionless in a tree. Her life expectancy might be longer if she did nothing, but her chances of passing this test dropped to 0. That was an unbearable thought to the determined girl. Of all people, the active duty Yuyan should understand that orders, once given, must be followed. Wasn't that the very point of this excursion? To prove to Headmaster Zoran that she had the spirit of a Yuyan? That she could obey orders instantly and without question? Give up now, and all of her training would be for naught. With renewed conviction fortifying her resolve, Shiori slowly climbed out of the tree. When no arrows appeared, she gave a sigh of relief. Her cheek throbbed anew. Pain once stalled by adrenaline now made itself known. She ignored it. Her priority was rearming herself. She carried 2 extra bowstrings, so she restrung her weapon and then inspected it once more. She drew and fired an imaginary arrow and checked it again. Satisfied, she slipped the bow back over her shoulder and slid down the creek bank. The cool water felt good on her sweaty and throbbing face. Her cheek was definitely going to sport a mark. Shiori gave renewed thanks that her hand had not taken the brunt of the bowstring strike. The last thing she needed was stiff and bruised fingers impeding her. The teen rose, wiping the drips of water from her face. Rolling her shoulders to relieve the tension in her back, Shiori realized that part of her still expected another red-fletched arrow to make an appearance. It was a silly notion. She was just a little out-of-place Yuyon trainee. With the Avatar in the area, no self-respecting Yuyon would waste time on her. She started in the direction of the Water Tribe siblings had taken, her lips pursed in thought. Falling directly after them would be suicide. Besides, Shiori very much doubted that the two would actually reach their destination. Her senior opponent would take them out well before their strength, such as they were, could be combined with the Avatar's awesome might. They couldn't have come too far, the girl mused, especially if it was the smell of cooking meat that had attracted them. She climbed out of the creek bed and stood with her back to the prevailing breeze. Then she angled her body to it. If she wanted to avoid further complications with her better-trained adversary, she was going to have to loop out and around and then double back, hopefully finding and arriving at the Avatar's campsite in time to either apprehend the boy herself or at least prevent his capture by the other. It was a ridiculous plan, but Shiori didn't have time to formulate a better one. Her mind made up, she set off through the forest, no longer traveling carefully, but jogging in a mile-eating lope that would see her to her destination without causing exhaustion. The Avatar's massive 6-legged beast was truly a sight to behold. Covered with shaggy white fur, it grazed the long grass in the cleaning like an oversized hippopotamus cow. Its saddle and massive size belied the notion that it could be used as a food source, though. Shiori knew better than to underestimate its abilities. Through one of her temporary commander's briefings, she knew the beast was intelligent, loyal, and strong. Furthermore, it was an airbender, capable of producing powerful blasts of air and of flight. Zuko seemed to hate the bison and its ability to spirit away the Avatar from any land-based danger. Shiori carefully kept to the downwind side of the Avatar's campsite. Lying flat on her stomach, she was hidden amongst the bushes on the edge of the clearing. She scanned the area, bow and arrow at her side. Of the blue-clad Water Tribe siblings, there was no sign. Shiori imagined their lifeless bodies were out in the forest somewhere, their unseen stalker having eliminated their threat long before they could reach the clearing. Unless, of course, Admiral Zhao had ordered them taken alive. Regardless, she very much doubted that they would be an issue. She took comfort from the fact that the Avatar's bison seemed calm and undisturbed. Unless her fellow hunter had been very lucky and had somehow run into the boy before he returned here, she took the beast's demeanor as an indication that the airbender had yet to be captured, which meant that she still had a chance. Eyes narrowed, the 14-year-old examined the opposite edge of the small field. There, somewhere, another archer lay in ambush. Perhaps more than one. Either way, the more she thought about it, the more she came to realize that she had no chance of capturing the Avatar and then escaping with him. And so her only option was to ensure that Admiral Zhao's men failed to apprehend the airbender too. Wiggling backward on her belly, Shiori gained greater cover. Once thoroughly shielded from the clearing, she rose from belly to knees and then shifted her weight to her feet. An idea formed. It was crazy, but it might work. She pulled 2 specially prepared arrows out of her quiver and stuck those head first into the dirt. Then she freed her spark rocks. And just in time, the grazing bison gave a deep, reverberating rumble, its shaggy horned head rising to look at the sky. Shiori struck one spark rock against the other, lighting both fuses.
Appa!
The Avatar really is just a kid.
Action quickly took precedence over thought. Before the monk could fly into view, one flare arrow soared into the air, as high as she could launch it. The other was planted next to one of the bison's 6 feet. They went off almost simultaneously. Before the monk could fly into view, one flare arrow soared into the air, as high as she could launch it. The other was planted next to one of the bison's 6 feet. They went off almost simultaneously. A huge red flash lit the sky, followed nearly instantly by a thunderous crack. The second explosion sent the bison into a panic. An unexpected, extremely powerful blast of air knocked Shiori off her feet and sucked the breath out of her lungs. With a deafening roar, the beast, fur aflame, disappeared into the sky. Appa! And then they were gone, with only the flattened grassland as evidence of their presence. The sky still glowed red from her flare. Shiori had been given them so she could signal she had been lucky enough to nab the Avatar. The Firebenders, of course, needs no such tools. Dazed, she slowly rose from the ground, shakily using a tree as an aid. Multiple arrows pinned her sleeve to the wood. 2 more planted themselves into her shoes. She froze. It was pointless to struggle. The flattened grass of the clearing and leaf-stripped bushes provided no cover. Slowly, she raised her free hand in surrender. There are at least 2 of them, a small portion of her brain noted. The arrows had come from 2 different trajectories. The rest of her mind fought against her rising fear, struggling to maintain control as she braced herself for the potential death strike. She could hear Shiyun's voice impartially telling his students where to aim if one wanted a quick death on a human, and where an arrow would only injure. Death by Yuyon arrow would be quick at least. She had no fear of them missing her vitals, but Shiori didn't want to die at all. Her mind cast about for an escape in desperation. Any movement she made would have to be sudden and unexpected. That meant somehow freeing both her arm and her feet simultaneously. It was impossible, and she knew it. A slight rustling of leaves announced the presence of someone behind her. She turned her head slowly, not wanting to further antagonize the archers. Despite the gravity of her situation, the sight of a full-fledged Yuyon made her lips curl up slightly. Her eyes hungrily ate up the image of the red-brown hawk's design painted on his face and the black headband adorning his brow. He was tall, with no extra flesh to encumber his graceful movements. His bow lay slung over his shoulder, reinforcing Shiori's belief that another, unseen archer had her covered. With the paint surrounding his eyes, Shiori could not gauge his level of irritation at her. Impassivity at its best. His face gave her no clues. Her own partial smile faded away. She was only 14, a trainee, alone on an island and far from any who would vouch for her. She had achieved her goal of scaring away the Avatar without giving full consideration to the consequences of said action. Still, Shiori tilted her chin up, refusing to cower before the taller man. The silence between them dragged on. The man's dark brown eyes explored every inch of her being, putting her of mind of Shuyun's penetrating gaze. No. That was not quite right, Shiori realized. The masters on Symmetra could make a student feel naked and vulnerable with just a glance. This overly long stare was simply an attempt to cow her. The man, fully trained as he might be, dropped a few notches in her estimation. Defiantly, she raised an eyebrow at him. She had every right to be here. After all, her assigned tasks had been handed out by Headmaster Zoran himself. The Yuyon frowned. He relieved her bow from the hand of her pinned arm and took her quiver away. Then he pursed his lips and gave a complex bird call. Another responded. From across the flattened clearing he came, shorter and perhaps very slightly plumper than his fellow archer. His stride had an almost imperceptible limp to it, and he picked his path with care. As he drew closer, Shiori could see that his light tan pants were torn and bloody near the knee, and that his raven black hair appeared to be as windswept as her own mouse brown locks. He gave his tall companion a nod, his gaze flashing over the pin trainee briefly before meeting her eyes.
You're a long way from home.
The spoken words carried a slight accent, marking the archer as a former colonial. Shiori shrugged, seeing no need to respond to the obvious. She fought the urge to attempt to pull her arm free. Against the 2 of them, she had no chance. The idea of being helpless rankled her.
Do you have a name?
Of course, don't we all?
The unwise response, fueled by Shiori's frustration at the situation, escaped before she could stop it. Her questioner glanced over her head to his partner. Something must have passed between them because it was the taller man who spoke next.
What are you doing here?
Headmaster Zoran sent me.
It was a partial truth at best, but the best answer she could conceive of in hopes of being set free. Another exchanged look over her head. That was getting annoying, and the shorter one resumed.
Are you alone?
Shiori's mouth parted, then closed, her brows furrowing down as she sought an answer that did not betray Prince Zuko and the others. When none presented itself, she repeated what she hoped would be her passport to freedom.
Headmaster Zoran sent me.
The shorter man snorted. His dark brown eyes had lost any semblance of kindness, hardening to the flint-like stare of a true Yuyan. Swallowing hard, Shiori could feel the muscles between her shoulder blades tighten. The presence of the tall, slim archer behind her suddenly became 100 times more disturbing than before. Surely she would not be shot in the back and left to die while pinned to a tree, right? But her brain already knew the answer to that question. For a Yuyan, the honor came from completing the assigned task. They weren't benders or swordsmen. Archers took whatever shots availed themselves, including shots to the back. It wasn't considered dishonorable. It was just another step in the process of accomplishing a goal.
No.
The native Fire Nation archer answered an unspoken question from his partner.
We will take her back to camp with the others. Maybe someone there will know what's going on.
Perhaps. But I personally hope she attempts to run for it. A trainee should know her place, and that place is Symmetra, not here ruining her brethren's chance for success.
I was not taught to make excuses for my failures.
The rebuff, although deadpanned, was enough to silence the former colonial. The taller archer moved around to the front of his captive.
Attempting to escape would be foolish.
Pulling the arrows free from her arm was difficult work, but Shiori managed. Once her mangled sleeve came loose, she stooped to pull out the arrows pinning her shoes. She handed the red-fletched arrows back to the brown-haired man, deferring to him over his darker-haired partner, partially out of spite, partially because he exuded an aura of authority the other lacked. The former colonial frowned but said nothing. In short order, her hands were bound in front of her by the same strong, thin rope all Yuyan carried. She knew better than to struggle. They marched her across the flattened field and back into the forest. The pace was slow, due to one archer's limp, and Shiori no longer able to properly balance herself. About 100 yards in, they came across the Water Tribe siblings, bound hand and foot and gagged and blindfolded to boot. The brother, who had obviously been attempting to inchworm himself away, was stuck halfway in and half out of a briar bush, his posterior up in the air.
Told you we should have tied them to a tree.
The shorter man liberated the boy from his predicament. Blindfolds and ankle bindings were removed. The two siblings blinked at Shiori in confusion. The trainee ignored them, although all three teens were now prisoners of Admiral Zhao's Yuyan. The Water Tribe teams were allies of the Avatar, while Shiori remained dedicated to his capture. Besides, she was hoping to be more of a temporary detainee than a true captive. The other two would no doubt be used as bait for the errant Avatar, in a location the Yuyan choose, one advantageous to ambush by archers. And since her own personal success depended on Zhao's troops' failure, Shiori was suddenly a tiny bit thankful to be in the position she was in. The Yuyan leashed the three together using short lengths of rope, with Shiori in the lead. As they turned southward, heading deeper into the former breeding grounds of the giant manta ray bats, the young archer could only hope that her luck would soon take a turn for the better.
Final Exam was written by Magnusrae. Avatar The Last Airbender is owned by Nickelodeon, Michael Dante DiMartino, and Brian Konietzko. The narrator for this story is Makeya Royer. The voice of Katara is Jocelyn Bouwers. The voice of Aang is Makeya Royer. The voice of Shiori is Lexi Orta. The voice of Archer 1 is Alexander Johnson. The voice of Archer 2 is Genndy C.O.G. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.